and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa. Tonight, Canada responds.
As I told President Trump during our call last week, Canada will respond to the U.S. auto tariffs.
The federal government announces targeted counter tariffs on about 10% of U.S. auto imports into this country, promising to use the proceeds to help workers. How will that work, and how far could this trade war go? Industry Minister Anita Anand is with us live in moments, and I'll ask her. Then we size up the national response.
A new Conservative government will eliminate the federal sales tax on Canadian-made automobiles.
New Democrats will bring in a victory bond, like we did in the World War.
Our front bench with Christy Clark, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen will weigh the response to Trump's tariffs and its impact on the campaign trail. Plus, the latest on the Republicans who are pushing back on the tariffs and the massive market volatility Trump has prompted.
This is a tax, plain and simple. Taxes should not be enacted by one person.
We'll have the latest as the markets close and why Trump's allies say he doesn't care about the losses.
And today I'm announcing that the Government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach, with 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the United States that are not compliant with CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement. And on the non-Canadian content of CUSMA-compliant vehicles from the United States as well. Our tariffs, though, unlike the U.S. tariffs, will not affect auto parts because we know the benefits of our integrated production system.
Canada dodged new so-called Liberation Day tariffs yesterday, but we did not emerge totally unscathed. Already in place, 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum and 10% on potash. And as of today, 25% tariffs on Canadian-made autos. Auto parts have been spared, but only until May 3rd. The Prime Minister, as you heard there, responded with 25% tariffs on U.S. vehicles that are not compliant with the North American Free Trade Deal. Auto parts have been exempted, and Mark Carney committed any revenue from counter tariffs will go to worker and industry relief. The Prime Minister's office tells us that in 2024, 67,000 vehicles were imported from the U.S. that were not compliant under our trade deal. That's roughly 10% of imports. Globally, Trump cut even deeper with fresh tariffs. Here's a look at some of the biggest ones. 34% on China, 20% on the European Union, 49% on Cambodia, and a 10% baseline tariff on most countries. That has shocked global markets. Take a look at this. Losses harkening back to the 2020 COVID shock today. Trump's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, however, told CNN the president will not back down.
Donald Trump is going to stand firm because he is reordering global trade. Make no mistake about it, America has been exploited, and he is done allowing America to be exploited. And no amount of the exploiters trying to swing harder at us after they've exploited us for all these years is going to change Donald Trump's view. What they can do is they can stop exploiting us. How about try that?
With us now is the Liberal candidate for the riding of Oakville, Ontario, Anita Anand. Tonight, she joins us, of course, in her capacity as Minister of Industry to respond to the imposition of auto tariffs and talk about the Canadian response. Hi, Minister. Good to have you here. Thank you very much for making the time.
Hi, Vashi. Good to see you.
I'm going to pick up exactly where Howard Lutnick left off, because in that interview, he basically intimated that Trump doesn't care about literally the worst day in the markets since 2020. If that doesn't punch through to the president, in your estimation, what, if anything, will?
Well, the markets lost $2.8 trillion, Vashi, and that in and of itself is a sign that the announcements from the White House yesterday are not only disruptive of the American, Canadian, and global economies, but that the devastation that these tariffs are going to occasion will continue in the long term, if not removed. So Canada's response to hit back with 25% tariffs on American-made vehicles that are not CUSMA compliant is a strong and proportionate response. And at the same time, we're going to put in place a framework. We call this a remission framework to ensure that auto producers can have relief as long as they maintain production and investment in our country. I've been on the phone most of the day with the auto sector, the auto companies, as well as labor, to ensure that they know that our government is there to support them every step of the way.
After those conversations, is it your view that an incentive structure is necessary to get them to stay in Canada? And I ask against, of course, the backdrop that Donald Trump has been explicit in trying to justify these tariffs by saying that he wants to move the sector from Canada and other countries back to the United States. Do you have any assurances that those companies are not going to pick up and leave?
Every one of the auto manufacturers has indicated to me that they do intend to stay in Canada, they do intend to produce in Canada, and that they want to work with the government of Canada to ensure that that continues to be possible. We have agreements in place with the auto manufacturers. That's our strategic investment fund, and we will continue to ensure that we come forward to maintain a healthy and vibrant auto manufacturing sector.
Is it your view, based on those conversations, that the structure, for example, that you just referenced, that the Prime Minister announced today, to sort of say, hey, you know, these counter tariffs won't necessarily apply to you if you maintain your operations in Canada? Do you think that's necessary to keep them there, or will they by their own volition? Like when they told you they'll stay, was it because they want to and they believe there's a business case to, or will the government have to intervene in some capacity to ensure that business case exists?
Well, there is no doubt that this is a volatile time, and yesterday was one of the most volatile moments in Canadian economic history that we have seen. Therefore, today's conversations are very much about ensuring that the auto manufacturers know that the Canadian government will be there for them to continue to develop, manufacture, and invest in Canada. And in fact, the framework, this remission framework that we will put in place, is aimed not only at the short term, but long-term retention of auto manufacturing in our country. So it's a very serious approach that we are taking as a government, not only 25% tariffs on the auto sector for U.S. made cars, but also this back-end remission framework that gives the auto manufacturing industry some assurance that the government of Canada will be there for them.
Can you detail, because I only understand, I guess, so much as the Prime Minister outlined today and some of the background details we got about the remission structure. Like, in layman's terms, what is the government prepared to do to keep these companies here? And does it mean that it will cost taxpayers money, essentially? Like, will you have to buttress the industry to keep it here? Will it be through loans? Will it just be through this structure that allows them to escape counter tariffs or the imposition of counter tariffs if they stay manufacturing here? Can you provide some specifics on that?
We will be able to provide specifics in short order. Those specifics are being ironed out now. And part of the reason I was on the phone with the auto companies was to obtain their feedback. We have a very close relationship here with not only industry, but labor and the broader parts sector. And it is an all hands on deck moment to make sure we're doing what is necessary for the Canadian economy. And so the idea of the remission framework is certainly to support the industry. There are various options on the table to do that. And once those are ironed out, I will come back and have a conversation about them.
I appreciate that. In principle, Minister, as the minister who does oversee this, do you foresee it being through loans, or foresee it, you know, through the way that the government supported a lot of business during COVID, which is money that ultimately didn't end up being recouped?
Loans are not primarily on the table right now, but I, again, don't want to go too far without ironing out this and obtaining the feedback from industry that is so important to ensure we're rolling out a program that supports them. That framework will be put in place in short order. But I don't want us to forget other industries. Steel, aluminum, those have been hit hard also with Trump tariffs, and our government will continue to ensure we are there for those industries. And as you said, the broader Canadian economy, we have in place $450 million for small businesses across the country should they need further supports. So this is a decision that the White House has made that is affecting all sectors and labor, and we need to do whatever possible to maintain the vibrancy of the Canadian economy through these troubled times. And I was pleased to see Prime Minister Carney do just that in his announcement this morning.
Your government also announced that the revenue from counter tariffs, which it estimates to be in the neighborhood of $8 billion, will go back to the workers in industry. Can you clarify? I couldn't find any detail about through what mechanism or like what exactly does that mean? Is that to buttress EI? Is that another kind of CERB plan in place? Like what is that money going to be used for?
Right now, you're exactly right to mention EI. What we are doing is removing obstacles to obtaining EI and EI top-ups as quickly as possible. And so in the short term, we will be working with internal government partners to support the EI system that may be accessed to a greater degree given what we are seeing in the workforce and potential layoffs there. But in the long term, we remain open to other possibilities to support labor as well as industry. The work that we are doing now is to present short and long-term options. Depending on how long this lasts, we need to be ready. But let's be clear that in the call with President Trump, Prime Minister Carney did agree that once this election is over, they would go back to the table and iron out some of the long-term specifics of not only the economic partnership, but also the defense and security relationship that is so crucial to our country.
Or whomever, I should point out, to be fair, since we're in a campaign, whomever is prime minister after the election, because we don't know the outcome of that. I do want to ask, though, because in his capacity as Prime Minister, Mark Carney today said, detailed basically his view of how the degree to which we have been interdependent with the United States and the degree to which the world really has looked to the United States for economic leadership, particularly in the realm of trade, is over. He said very specifically. He said it's a tragedy and it's a new reality. And he also talked about Canada amplifying trade with looking to other like-minded countries. And it's in that vein that I wanted to ask, I've covered your government for a number of years. I've covered CETA. I've covered the Indo-Pacific strategy, a lot of different efforts to diversify trade that ultimately resulted in the same portion of our goods and services heading to the United States today as did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, give or take a couple of percentage points. 3/4 of what we send, no matter what your government did to try and amplify trade with other countries, still goes to the United States. So what new plan will you put forward to Canadians to do the opposite? And why should Canadians trust that your government can do that when it hasn't been able to over the last decade?
Actually, we are the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. So the first step is going to be to leverage each and every one of those trading relationships. The second step is going to look internally and make sure that we are dismantling internal barriers to trade, which could add up to $200 billion to the Canadian economy. So there are steps that we will take immediately as a result of the very devastating announcement relating to tariffs that President Trump has made over the last number of weeks. But make no mistake, this is about reordering trade relationships. This is about developing stronger trading relationships within Canada and with other partners. And that's exactly what this moment requires us to do. Regardless of the decisions that the United States is taking, this moment signifies a time where we need to broaden our trade relationships and leverage our natural resources and critical mineral sectors. Canada has everything that other countries want. Now will be the time to leverage those critical minerals and raw materials in particular, so that the United States and every other country that wants those minerals knows that there will be a price to pay when you want to trade with Canada.
But with great respect, Minister, my question wasn't about how many free trade deals we have. I pointed out that I've covered all of the ones that your government has signed over the last decade. When you raise the issue of leveraging, I think Canadians would wonder, why hasn't it been leveraged before? Like, why does it take this crisis to leverage trade deals that have been in place in some cases for a number of years? And if you couldn't leverage it over the last decade, why should they believe you will going forward?
Well, because they saw that we signed a free trade agreement with the United States in 2017 that Donald Trump himself signed. And we had assurance based on that agreement with the United States that, for example, $150 billion per year for the auto sector could transfer across the Canada-U.S. border. That equation has now changed, and that requires us now to pivot and develop another strategy. And that requires us to have a leader who is serious and capable and experienced, one who has managed financial crises in the past, and one who will carry our country and our country's economy forward during these turbulent times.
All right, Minister, I'll leave it there. I think your mouse is going crazy on the screen. I appreciate you making the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Anita Anand. She is the Minister of Industry. Also, of course, during the federal election campaign, a Liberal candidate for the riding of Oakville, Ontario. Let's turn to reaction from other parties today on the campaign trail. Take a listen.
I will push hard to end the tariff madness. On my first day on the job as Prime Minister, I will call the President and demand that we rapidly renegotiate the CUSMA agreement.
Our job number one has to be protecting these workers. We've got to fight back and make sure that we are building a stronger economy in our country, and that means building Canadian and buying Canadian.
Both leaders focused campaign announcements on this issue as well, with Pierre Poilievre promising a Conservative government would remove the GST from Canadian-made cars and provide $3 billion through a Keep Canadians Working fund for short-term lines of credit and low-interest loans to help businesses affected by Donald Trump's tariffs. And Jagmeet Singh, who earlier promised to remove GST from Canadian-made cars, also pledged an NDP government would launch tax-free Canada Victory bonds and put the money raised from them towards public infrastructure. There's some breaking news on our watch. Donald Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump, has just spoken, I'm being told, I think, about this issue. So we'll play a little bit of that. Let's take a listen in.
Expected, where this is a patient that was very sick. We really inherited a terrible economy, as you know, with a lot of problems, including loss of manufacturing and plants closed up all over the country. You know, we've lost 90,000 plants since NAFTA, if you think of that. 90,000. It's not even believable. And about 6 million jobs. And so it was a sick patient. It went through an operation on Liberation Day. And it's going to be a booming country, a very booming country. It's going to be amazing, actually. And we see it because we have trillions of dollars committed to come in, trillions.
Sir, can I ask you, when you say that it was an operation and the patient's healthy now, does that mean you see us as kind of towards the high water mark in terms of how high?
Sure. The operation's over, and now we let it settle in. You see the plants are starting to construction already. We have many plants. Indiana massive auto plant, the Honda, and we have so many plants, and they'll be under construction. And as they start to build, you're going to see a lot of construction jobs, and you're going to see a lot of jobs when they open.
Does that mean chips and pharma tariffs are not on the table?
They're starting very soon. The chips are starting very soon. The pharma is going to be starting to come in, I think, at a level that you haven't really seen before. We are looking at pharma right now, pharmaceuticals, as a separate category. And we'll be announcing that sometime in the near future, not too distant future.
Are you negotiating?
That's under review right now.
Are you negotiating with partners currently?
What we have is we have a set of tariffs based on what they've been charging us. That's reciprocal. And those tariffs have come in, and every country's called us. That's the beauty of what we do. We put ourselves in the driver's seat. If we would have asked some of these countries, almost most of these countries, to do us a favor, they would have said no. Now they'll do anything for us. But we have tariffs, they've been set, and it's going to make our country very rich.
But are you open to deals with these countries if they're calling you?
Well, it depends. If somebody said that we're going to give you something that's so phenomenal, as long as they're giving us something that's good. For instance, with TikTok as an example, we have a situation with TikTok where China will probably say, we'll approve a deal, but will you do something on the tariff? The tariffs give us great power to negotiate. Always have. I've used them very well in the first administration, as you saw, but now we're taking it to a whole new level because it's a worldwide situation. And it's very exciting to see. And what it's done is driven a lot of great companies to our country, and you're going to see construction starting all over. I already got a couple of calls from Lee Zeldin from Environmental. He's got some big plans to approve. Mr. President.
How long will it take to get manufacturing, American manufacturing, to where you would like to see it?
Well, let's say it's a 2-year process. You know, they start a plant, and they're big plants. We're giving them approval to also, in many cases, to build the electric facility with it. So you have electric generation and the plant, and they're big plants. Now, the good news is a lot of money for them, and they can build them fast, but they're still very big plants. So I'd always say it would take a year and a half to 2 years.
Mr. President, I'm curious.
They've already started. So
Have you been following?
All right, that was U.S. President Donald Trump speaking moments ago on Air Force One, doubling down on the global trade war he launched, insisting that construction would start all over. In his words, I will point out that Stellantis decided today to lay off 900 auto workers in the United States. He continued talking about it as an operation. He said it would settle in. He also said that he's received calls from, quote unquote, every country in response to the levying of these quite extensive tariffs. We're going to take a quick break. We've got a special edition of our front bench to respond to what you just heard and, of course, dissect the Canadian response. Christy Clark, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen will be here in just 2 minutes. There they are. Stay with us right here on Power Play.
the markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal? They've taken advantage of us for many, many years. For many years, we've been at the wrong side of the ball, and I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be unbelievable. The thing that people have to talk about, we're up almost to $7 trillion of investment coming into our country, and you'll see how it's going to turn out. Our country's going to boom.
Donald Trump's North American tariff trade war has gone global, overtaking this country's federal election campaign once again, this time in week 2, and throwing the markets into a significant tailspin. Here to unpack the consequences of all of that is our front bench. With me this evening, former Liberal BC Premier Christy Clark. She's now a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now the CEO of Tony Clement International. And former NDP MP and BC Minister Nathan Cullen is with us. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Hi, everybody. It's very nice to see you. Nathan, I'll start with you. I just found that those comments from Air Force One so interesting only insofar as literally the worst day since COVID in the markets. And I think, there would have been a general assumption that if the markets were that bad, that would be a thing to get through to Donald Trump. And it appears to not be doing that at all. Like, where does that leave us, I guess?
Well, that assumption was made because that seemed to have some effect on Mr. Trump in his first term as president, that if the markets tank like they are right now, billions and billions of dollars, primarily of people's savings, are being shed off the market exclusively because of his actions, that would have toned him down a little bit in the first run. That doesn't seem to be working this time. He's talking about this being an operation. Well, we can add one more complaint against Mr. Trump, which is he's performing malpractice, because he's hurting Americans. U.S. Republican senators are now starting a little bit to push back, governors, et cetera, because this is what it is. It's a tax on American people at a time when we've gone collectively through years of high inflation, and the cost of living will only be driven up from everything from cars to food to the cost of rebuilding those homes in Los Angeles. And again, all of this in attacking one of the U.S.'s longest, if not the best trading partner they've ever had, is incoherent. It's not an operation. This is not good for America, and it's certainly terrible for Canada and the global trading partners that we've made.
Christy, when we were together a week ago, it was when Donald Trump signed the executive order for the auto tariffs specifically. And at the time, Mark Carney, acting in his capacity as prime minister, just said that we would wait till they were imposed before imposing our own counter tariffs. The decision that they took today, the federal government, was to impose tariffs on autos coming in, but not on auto parts. So not completely dollar for dollar. Do you think that was the right calibration?
I think that it's important that we think about a nuanced response to the tariffs. I think that kind of a blanket tariff for tariff, whether or not it hurts Canada, is a terrible idea. So I think it's great that I think all the parties are considering this with some care, because a tariff is a tax on the people who buy those goods. So America's, the price of eggs in the United States have gone up, and lots of other costs of basic foodstuffs have gone up. We talk about that and we say we're counting on that to be part of the reason President Trump is going to show some restraint and perhaps start to walk away from this crazy plan. Well, why should we do the same thing to Canadians? If they're already going to be adding to the cost of some goods in Canada, a retaliatory tariff for tariff response means everything else, we're also going to decide to make everything more expensive for Canadians. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's some areas where you certainly want to do it, but I think it needs to be done with care, and we need to be remembering that Canadians are already bearing the brunt of a lot of stupid decisions from President Trump. We don't want a lot of dumb decisions from Canadian politicians to add to that burden.
Tony, I know that when we're talking about politics, especially in a campaign, we often talk about the differences between the political leaders. It seems like there's, again, a bit of convergence between what Mark Carney is saying and what Pierre Poilievre is saying, albeit in different ways, but about what the end state of this looks like, a renegotiation, essentially, of the free trade agreement that governs the relationship between our two countries. Both have said now that is basically, if they were to become prime minister, what would happen on day one. I do take, however, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's point that might be problematic, given, how can you enter into good faith negotiations with someone who treated the deal that exists at the moment so nefariously and with such little regard? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I know, and let me respond to the clip you had of the president saying everything's going to boom, or I think it's gone kaboom right now. The bomb has gone off markets and the international response. So he's gonna have to grapple with that. But in terms of the immediate responses of the leader of the opposition and the prime minister of the country, yeah, I think in terms of the immediate response, in terms of countermeasures, there's not a lot of daylight between them. However, I think what you're going to see is some differences in how to respond in the long term. We all want sovereignty. We all want our country to be sovereign, making the decisions that have to be made for the future of our country and for Canadians. But how you get there, I do believe there are divergences of that. And you'll see that in the upcoming couple of weeks leading to the leaders' debate that is going to be most important.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because last week we had talked as well, Nathan, about like the impact overall of this on the campaign and the various positioning. Has that evolved in your mind at all over the last week? Like, do you see it? I mean, we kept saying pivot, pivot, pivot. Like, what is your take on, has there been a pivot? Is there a pivot? How are they positioning themselves?
Well, they've, as Christy talked about, they've got to speak to Canadians' concerns and also hopes. Elections are ideally about a hopeful position, things that Canadians want, and that politicians and leaders are reflecting those hopes in the platform and the promises that get made. So we can't. I know a lot of this election has been about the orange man to the south, but it can't entirely be about that. And I was glad to see the NDP out talking about housing, taking the GST off of cars and home heating and certain things that are going to affect Canadian in their pocketbooks. That's where people are going to see the impacts. Of course, there's the fear. What do we do with laid off auto workers? What do we do when the impacts of Mr. Trump's so-called operation start affecting us in significant ways? And leaders have to have a response to that. The NDP is in a good position in the sense of a long, long history of standing up for workers and protecting people when they're in trouble, making sure that healthcare is there and all the things that we need. I'm still curious to see if this can last the final 3 weeks of the campaign. Can this remain the only central issue? I know Mr. Poilievre and some of the Conservatives wanted Mr. Trump to stand down so that their guy, Mr. Poilievre, had a shot in this election. That's not going to happen. Mr. Trump's got his own nefarious ways about doing things, and he's going to continue on. And that may remain the central question for all the leaders going into the debate and then actually on polling day as well.
Christy, I just have a few minutes. I want to get both you and Tony in on this round as well. Is it your view that it would remain as dominant an issue as it is right now for the next 3 weeks?
I think probably will be continue to be the central issue, but I agree with Nathan. I think other issues are going to come up, because this idea that we can not talk about housing, we cannot talk about Bill C-69, we cannot talk about resource development and how we're going to grow our foreign markets. I think we've got to talk about those things because they're pretty important for growing the economy. But can I just say this quickly? My view of debates is this. I think that they're vastly overrated for the audio and vastly underrated for the video. Because if you, one of the people closest to me in my life always says, what Canadians really do is we turn off the sound and we just actually see what's happening. And if this is a battle of how the leaders look and behave on the stage, I think Mark Carney's outcome is going to be pretty good, regardless of what's said. He presents as a leader.
Last word to you, Tony, on that.
Yeah, no, I actually, what I've been doing is talking to voters. I've been in 6 GTA ridings in the last 7 days, knocking on doors. And I think your point is absolutely right, Vashi, that there is a big issue, but it's bigger than Trump and tariffs. It's more like economic uncertainty writ large, and that's cost of living, cost of housing. Is my neighborhood still safe? All of these issues are coming up at the door. Yes, Trump tariffs are part of that mix too, but people are starting to look at the broader picture because this is such a consequential election. So for me, all bets are off. We've got 3.5 weeks to go, a lot of time to persuade a lot of people, particularly in the 905 of the GTA, that things have got to change for the better. So we're going to have a wild ride, that's for sure.
Okay, the wild ride continues. Don't worry, we've got to take a commercial break, but all 3 of our front bench panelists are sticking around. We're back in just a moment.
Yesterday, in an op-ed, Preston Manning wrote that people in Eastern Canada need to recognize, he said, that a vote for the Liberals is a vote for Western secession and a breakup of the country as we know it. Do you agree with Mr. Manning, and what do you say to people who feel that way?
No, we need to unite the country. We need to bring all Canadians together in a spirit of common ground. Let's unite our nation.
That was Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre today rejecting the thesis of former Reform Party leader Preston Manning. Manning wrote this week in an op-ed in the Globe and Mail that voting Liberal would spark a national unity crisis on account of the mismanagement, he said, of national affairs for the past decade by the Liberal government and its consistent failure to address those issues of greatest concern to Western Canadians. Large numbers of Westerners simply will not stand for another 4 years of Liberal government, no matter who leads it. We are back with the front bench to talk about that. Christy Clark, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen. Tony, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the answer from Mr. Poilievre, who was, as you heard in that question, posed the thesis very, very specifically that Preston Manning had put forward.
Well, I think that was absolutely the correct answer. If you're going to run for prime minister, you have to be a uniter, not a divider. And Pierre Poilievre understands that. And it's way too early to talk about all of the doom and gloom. I think another thing about running for prime minister is you've got to have a positive vision for the future. So again, Pierre Poilievre gets that. And I think that in that respect, that answer was the perfect answer.
Chris, I have two Westerners here on the panel, neither from Alberta, but two in British Columbia. Christy, I wanted to ask you about the sentiment, I guess, underpinning what Preston Manning wrote, and if you think that will factor into the election, because it has vis-a-vis Danielle Smith to one degree or another at different times.
Yeah. So first, I like Preston Manning a lot. I know him personally, but I will say what a terrible bomb to drop on Poilievre in the middle of the campaign. He's got to spend a day talking about what Preston Manning had to say rather than talking about housing and other things that he'd prefer to be discussing. I do think, but it causes me to have kind of two important, I think, contributions in this. One is that if you think about national unity, here we have Quebec, which is now more Canadian flags are flying in Quebec than have flown in Quebec City and Montreal probably since the 60s. So we're starting to see Quebec, which we all had thought, many had thought, was on the verge of another national unity referendum, becoming very pro-Canadian, pro-patriotic, pro-unity. On the other hand, and that, I don't think there's any doubt, as a result of 10 years of federal government completely ignoring and refusing the requests from Western Canadians around resource development, around economic growth, around kind of a fair share for Canada. 10 years of not fighting for national unity in Ottawa has meant that we are now in this situation where you've got a premier in Alberta who is profoundly hostile to Canada, right at a time where we need national unity more than any other. So I've said this on your show before, Vashi, most important job of any prime minister is unity, 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 bringing the country together. Justin Trudeau did not succeed on that front. And now, despite, I think, the very good job that Prime Minister Carney is doing, we are seeing the fruits and the costs of that treatment of Western Canada for 10 years.
What's the best way to mitigate that, Nathan?
Well, not listen to Danielle Smith on this stuff. Honestly, I hear Christy's point. Western alienation, it's been around longer than I've been alive. Sometimes there is a really good source for it where we feel left out, especially over here on the other side of the Rockies. It's a little hard to always hear our voices reach Ottawa. But at a moment, as you said, Vashi, when Canadians are feeling a threat from outside of our borders, which is often the only upside is that there is a coming together of Canadians. We've been able to reclaim the Canadian flag on our front lawns from the truckers and convoy activists and say clearly that as a country together, we are much better than we are divided. And I find Mr. Manning's comments terrible for somebody who did also pursue that seat of power. And I want to challenge Tony a little bit. We both served in Parliament. I think when Mr. Poilievre was there, he was accused of many things. He has some talents. One of them is not as a unifier. He's really good at attacking. He's very good at taking shots at people, bringing people down, giving them names. A lot of things that, frankly, and this has been unfortunate timing for him, echo the tactics used by Mr. Trump south of the border. I think that is one of the things that's contributing to the lack of support Pierre is seeing in the polls, because people are not looking for that tone and sentiment right now of the name calling, the attacking, the dividing. So He may be many things. I've never put him in the category of a great unifier, and that's a challenge. Now, Jagmeet Singh's got an opportunity to place himself in this as the Liberals drift to the center and to the right on some issues, to be able to talk to Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And maybe this becomes more of that central issue. Beyond that first question that you asked earlier, Vashi, about Trump being the sole issue on the ballot coming up into the election, how to bring this country together, but not listening to voices that say we should be entertaining secessionist practices and policies as if that were somehow a good strategy when dealing with the existential threat of Donald Trump.
Well, let me just...
Tony, I know you want to respond. You want to jump in there. Yeah, go ahead.
Nathan's intervention. I always enjoyed them in the House of Commons. But Nathan, you may remember, I used to say there's only 4 words you need to know in opposition. Those jerks did what? But now Pierre Poilievre is not running for leader of the opposition. He's running for prime minister. I think, one, if you listen to him during his rallies or his speeches, he is putting forward a positive vision for the country. He understands his role is different now, wearing a crisp white shirt and a nice tie and talking about the future. And I think that that's the Pierre Poilievre that he is introducing to Canadians, and it's going to work in the end.
It's just, I would only offer that it's hard with the talents, quote unquote, that brought him to this place are not going to serve him well if the tone, and we know what we're talking about here in terms of the attacks. I think they have actually continued and very personal. And Pierre and I, we used to talk about this. I'd say you can make your point without trying to tear people down personally. He chose a different path. It is also just by circumstance the same tactics and path that the current president of the United States chooses in his politics. Well, I think that's having an effect on Canadian opinions about all our leaders.
Let's
Mr.
remember
Carney may be the most
that
boring person in
Canadian
Canadian politics.
I have like
maybe people are looking for that.
This is the same people in the Conservative
I'll give you 30
campaign.
seconds, Christy, and then Tony, go for it. Yeah, pardon me.
The same people in the Conservative campaign that last time brought us the barbaric practices hotline that lost the Conservatives the election in 2015. Same people doing it, different people saying the words.
No. Listen,
okay, Tony,
all I can tell you. No, I encourage watchers of your show to listen to Poilievre, to listen to what he's saying. He's got a good future plan for the country, and if he's going to be sharp on anyone, he's going to be sharp on Donald Trump. He's not going to be sharp on the country, and that's what we need in a leader right now.
Feels a little conflicted on that particular attack line.
I'll leave our discussion. I will leave, our discussion there. I appreciate the discussion and the debate, and we'll be back next week. I appreciate it. Thank you so much to our front bench. Christy Clark, Nathan Cullen, and Tony Clement. We'll be back with Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey next.
We all agreed that we got the best of a bad deal, which in my opinion is still totally unacceptable. The only thing that's acceptable is 0 tariffs.
He's not respecting the agreement. So we cannot accept that he decides which sector are affected.
Our work to diversify markets will not change. In fact, we'll probably continue to ramp that up.
This does create an opportunity for us to deepen our relationship, to deepen our trading relationship, our security relationship with countries that value fair trade, with countries that value democracy.
A sampling of reaction there from premiers across the country in response to getting what Doug Ford calls the good end of a bad deal. Canada won't see sweeping so-called reciprocal tariffs, but auto tariffs come into effect today and steel and aluminum ones remain. Premiers met with the Prime Minister this morning, among them the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Andrew Furey. Hi, Premier. Good to see you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Vashi, how are you?
Good, thank you, and I hope you're well as well. I wanted to start off on the tariffs that we do know are in effect on the auto sector, because I had read an interview that you gave not too long ago in which you said if those did go through, that a downturn in the economy in Ontario of a scale similar to this would have an impact on your province. Can you just detail how?
Of course. Well, I mean, Ontario is the economic engine, really, of the rest of Canada. And so if there is a downturn in the Ontario economy, that is going to ripple across the rest of Canada without any question. If there's a downturn in the GDP of Ontario, there's going to be a downturn in the GDP of Canada, and subsequently that's going to impact people in Newfoundland and Labrador. But it's beyond just the metrics and the financial implications for subnational economies. This is a national moment, and if there are families who are out of work, if there are full industries impacted in Ontario, then that is a national issue, and that will be felt here in Newfoundland and Labrador. At the beginning of this issue, I felt that there could be no scenario in which region was pitted against region or industry against industry. And so this calls for a national united front to help support, in particular, Ontario in this situation with respect to auto manufacture and the good people who work in that industry.
Do you feel this is a complete, as it's been called by some other leaders, a complete reorientation of the global trading relationship as we had once pictured it to be?
I absolutely do. I think as Canadians are unpackaging yesterday's announcement, they need to look at it in different buckets, and one distinct impact or one distinct package is global trade and the global marketplace. And yesterday, that was upended. The marketplace was turned on its head, and each individual country now will be responding in their own right. I think this creates an incredible amount of uncertainty, and you can think in Canada or Newfoundland and Labrador that we live a long ways away from Japan or Taiwan or other markets in the world, and that is true. But investors come to Canada because of our vast natural resources. So if you're an investor in Japan right now and you're looking at a mine or a hydrogen project, for example, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the uncertainty that was created with that ridiculous poster yesterday will undoubtedly cause them pause and will undoubtedly cause a massive pause in the investor climate. So that is a concern to us globally. Secondarily, we look at the relationship between Canada and the United States, and that has distinctly and definitively changed. There is no question about it. I do believe that over time, calmer heads, cooler heads, a more mature and rational, logical thought process will prevail. But the trust that has been eroded will take years to rebuild between Canadians and Americans. And then, of course, at the micro level, there is the impact to Canadian families, whether that's from increasing costs of goods and services or from layoffs. I mean, we're hearing today in Ontario alone that there are going to be mass layoffs. And that has not only an impact on those particular families, but that reverberates across the entire country. And this is a national moment, and we need to meet it.
You mentioned, I guess, the posture of yours to not pit one region against each other or one sector against each other. And I would take note out of the Premier's meeting today of listening to other Premier's comments, namely Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the Prime Minister Mark Carney, who was at the time serving, I should say, in his capacity in that role, not as Liberal leader, which he now is as he heads to Montreal. But both of them, referenced the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan and their efforts and talked about the meeting in very positive terms that took place today, and the degree of unanimity around Canada's response to what is in place. Is that a fair assessment? Like, what can you tell us about the reaction from premiers in the aggregate?
Absolutely. I think there was a very unified approach. There was unified concern for the people in the auto sector in particular, and for Premier Ford and the citizens that he represents. There was not one region versus the other. There was not one industry versus the other. There was a strong, united national voice in support for those directly impacted. There was also strong support for the Prime Minister, by the way, who is doing a great job in changing, if not the economic impacts and the fiscal trajectory of the tariffs, certainly changing the dialogue and the symbolism and the language that the President of the United States is using towards Canada. And that may seem small, and it may seem perhaps unusual and bizarre, what I'm about to say, but we finally have the President of the United States recognizing the country of Canada as a country. Finally have the President of the United States recognizing our elected head of state as the Prime Minister. I take that to be very constructive, but I also take it to be a direct result of the Prime Minister's conversations with the President, and I do think that there should be, as a consequence of those discussions, a path towards resolution on the fiscal and tariff front.
Do you trust it, though? I mean, do you trust any change in posture, to be fair? And while certainly I understand that, in the way Premier Ford described it, we got the best of a bad deal, it's still a bad deal. There are still tariffs that came into effect today, and very significant ones.
Oh, make no mistake, I don't take yesterday as a moment to celebrate, and frankly, I think it's the opposite. It's a day of significant concern. While we weren't on the poster and the placard, that is not reason to celebrate. All those tariffs, as you suggest, still are in place, and now there are additional tariffs. And I would say that there is still a cloud of uncertainty over this that the president has telegraphed with respect to other industries. Targeted tariffs potentially coming in lumber, pharmaceuticals, and other industries. So this story is not finished, and there will be ongoing conversations undoubtedly. So I don't take yesterday to celebrate at all. I take it as a significant ongoing concern. And we need to recognize that yesterday was not a good moment for Canada-U.S. relations. It wasn't a good moment for the Canadian economy. But if I'm trying to find the silver lining, and the silver lining that I've seen in the last week is that there has been a change of tone and posture with respect to recognizing Canada as a sovereign country. As bizarre as that is to say coming out of my lips, I understand that. But for the first time since he's been elected, he has changed how he's referring to Canada and to our Prime Minister.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Premier Furey, thanks so much for your time as always.
Thanks very much, Vashi.
Andrew Furey is the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. You heard him reference the volatility in the markets that this tariff announcement prompted. Let me show you the picture of what exactly that looks like. In fact, U.S. stock markets had their worst losses or their biggest losses today that they've had since COVID times, since during actually 2020. $3 trillion has been removed from the valuation of the stock markets in the United States since Donald Trump was inaugurated on January the 20th. He also spoke on Air Force One and talked about additional tariffs beyond just those reciprocal in nature that he announced yesterday, 10% across the board, and on a number of other countries, not Canada or Mexico, but he did reference things like pharmaceuticals and chips, and that is something that we heard Prime Minister Mark Carney, the leader of the Liberal Party, during the election campaign, but this morning, acting in his capacity as Prime Minister, referenced as well that there would be, it was his understanding, additional tariffs in those sectors. He also mentioned lumber and agriculture, two very significant parts of this country's economy in different parts of the nation as well. So we'll keep our eye on news to come on that. I'll leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Capellos. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful rest of your night.